Hello, and welcome to today's eLife webinar, part of a series on fellowships for early career researchers. Today we're going to be talking about Sir Henry Dale postdoctoral fellowships. So my name is Fiona Watt. I'm going to moderate this afternoon's session. I'm Director of the Centre for Stem Cells and Regenerative Medicine at King's College London, and I have a great and long-standing interest in fostering careers of young researchers. But I'm also Deputy Editor of eLife, and I'm going to start with a few points to introduce the journal eLife to you. eLife was founded a few years ago with generous funding from the Wellcome Trust, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and the Max Planck Society. And we're committed to publishing outstanding research in life sciences and biomedicine, all the way from fundamental and theoretical work through to translational, applied, and clinical research. One of our innovative features is that we are committed to fair and fast peer review by scientists, and our peer review system is designed to overcome the endless cycles of submission, review, re-review, which can be so dispiriting for scientists, particularly early in their careers. But eLife is much more than just a journal, and we're particularly keen to add value to the scientific community via events such as today's webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the panels today. We have Candace Hassall from the Wellcome Trust, Alexander Thompson from the Royal Society, and Victoria Mail, or Vicky Mail, who is a Sir Henry Dale Fellow at UCL. And then fielding your questions, we have Lena Dahl in Cambridge and Sophie Drinkwater at the Wellcome Trust. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Candy. I'm having trouble with the slides. Can you change them for us? It seems to have frozen. Yeah.
That's okay.
Sorry about this.
This. So I'll just briefly introduce the Sir Henry Dale Fellowships, which were launched in October 2011, with the first awards made in June 2012. And they're designed to support future leaders in biomedical research. Today we're going to be covering a number of areas. I'll briefly introduce the partnership between the Royal Society and the Wellcome Trust, which support Sir Henry Dale Fellows. We're then going to talk about who can apply for Sir Henry Dale and then Alexander will be talking about what is offered by the Sir Henry Dale Fellowship Scheme, and briefly cover the assessment process before Vicky tells us all about how it feels from the perspective of a real-life applicant. After that, we'll move on to provide general tips, advice, and answer your questions. So if you have questions as we run through the details, please don't hesitate to enter them into the webinar. So we still haven't got the slides. So I'll just talk about the two funding partners. So there is a very strong partnership between the Royal Society and the Wellcome Trust to support the Sir Henry Dale Fellowships, because both organisations are dedicated to the... There we go, the next slide. Brilliant, thank you, Fiona. So both the Royal Society and the Wellcome Trust are dedicated to the support of outstanding researchers at all career stages, and so we felt it important that two of the most influential scientific organisations created this joint scheme for to support and to nurture future research leaders in biomedical science and public health. We named them Sir Henry Dale Fellows because, as a Nobel Prize winner, Sir Henry Dale was actually formerly chairman of the Wellcome Trust and also president of the Royal Society, so we couldn't think of anyone better to represent the interests of both organisations. If I move on now briefly to the eligibility to apply, it all is around the research area you're in. So the research you're planning on doing must address an important biomedical or public health question. The scheme is open to non-clinical researchers. The Wellcome Trust has a whole suite of fellowship schemes that will support clinicians who do research in this area. But the Sir Henry Dale Fellowships are for non-clinical researchers. The research can be based in the lab or in the office or in the clinic or the field, and all may involve experimental or theoretical approaches. So a very, very broad remit indeed. We are keen to encourage people working in disciplines outside biomedical sciences to propose research projects to apply their expertise to biomedical problems as well. So we're looking for people with the relevant scientific or mathematical qualification. And we do have an eligibility criteria, which is at interview, we expect you to be no more than 7 years from the date of your PhD viva. However, please note, and this is very, very important, that we do take into account any time out of research into consideration when we're looking at your eligibility. Plus, if you have been a parent or a carer or have had significant sick leave, we will allow an additional 6 months on top of the actual time you took out of research. So, in terms of your nationality, you can be a UK or EEA national, or someone who has a relevant degree from a UK university, or has worked in the UK for a continuous 3 period, or if you have already identified a suitable host institution in the UK, and if you are exceptionally strong, then anyone can apply to us. 2 other points I'd like to make before we move on is if you currently hold a lectureship in the UK, then this scheme is not for you if you're planning to stay in the same place. Instead, you can apply for one of our investigatory awards. And from the outset, you need to have identified an eligible sponsoring host institution in the UK, even though, for example, some of your research may be carried out overseas. So to pass over to Alexander to talk about what we offer you.
Thank you, Candace. So the Sir Henry Dale Fellowship is a very generous fellowship, and it provides support for up to 5 years in the first instance. You can extend the award by a further 3 years if you're successful at the renewal stage, so you could get 5 plus 3 years of support, which is a very long time to help you establish your independent career. Fellowships are offered on a flexible basis, so you can work part-time, and the Wellcome Trust will consider any career breaks.
Yes.
The fellowship will provide expenses for your salary as set by your host organisation, and you will receive an enhancement of up to £7,500 per annum, which is provided by the Wellcome Trust. The fellowship will also provide research expenses, which includes research assistance, and can be used to support either a postgraduate RA or a postdoctorate RA, whichever is appropriate for your research program. The fellowship will also provide expenses for materials and consumables and other small items of equipment, and can also be used to support travel and subsistence, to support any overseas travel you have as part of your fellowship. I do believe that these fellowships can be undertaken in low and middle income countries, and the Wellcome Trust will support you during your time overseas. In addition, the funders will provide a flexible funding allowance and an inflation allowance, which is set by the Wellcome Trust. The Royal Society contributes £11,000 per annum to the cost of indirect and estate costs. Both funding partners provide a range of training opportunities and encourage you or allow you to apply for additional research support through the Enhancement Award and research grants to either purchase large items of equipment that are essential to your research program, or to investigate new lines or avenues of research. So in terms of the assessment process, Sir Henry Dale Fellowships are available 3 times per year on a rolling basis. Initially, you will have to submit a pre-application to the scheme, which is assessed internally by staff at the Wellcome Trust, and they will look at your eligibility and your track record. And the Wellcome Trust will decide to invite you to submit a full application. Full applications will then be sent out for external peer review by scientific experts, and normally it will be a minimum of 3 reviewers approached to review your application before then going to the expert review groups, which there are 9, and you will be sent to the most appropriate ERG or expert review group for your application. The ERG will then shortlist your application for interview, and you will be interviewed by Mr. Henry Dale Fellowship panel, either at the offices at the Wellcome Trust or Royal Society. And at present, there are between 12 to 15 panel members on the panel. They comprise of experts across a wide range of scientific disciplines. I am now going to pass you on to Victoria now, who shall share her experiences as welcome. Oh, Henry Dale, sorry.
Sir Henry Dale, hello. I'm Vicky, I'm Sir Henry Dale Fellow. I took my fellowship up in March at UCL, so I'm a very recent fellow actually, and this is all quite fresh in my memory, so I can tell you how it really is. First of all, a little bit about where I was when I applied for the fellowship. I'd done my PhD in Cambridge, and I'd moved to London to do a postdoc, and with what might be considered excellent timing or terrible timing, my postdoctoral contract finished the day before I gave birth to my son. And in fact, 10 days before JX Men came back to me and said, yes, we like your paper, and can you do a whole load of extra work? So I kind of worked around that, and I thought, oh, the paper's in, I'm going to spend a little bit of time at home enjoying my son. But after a while, after a few months, I thought, well, I've really got to get back into work, I've got to pay the bills. And I actually found it quite difficult to get back into science. I was applying for lots of postdocs, but everything really that was vaguely suitable. And partly because of that, real feeling that I had to find something, I applied for some things that I maybe wouldn't have thought of either, usually. And one of those things was the Sir Henry Dale Fellowship. And the reason I maybe wouldn't have considered it if I hadn't been in this position of really needing to find something was because I had just 3 years of postdoctoral experience. And you have a tendency, I think, a natural inclination to think, is that really enough? I need to get some more experience before I'll be good enough to do something like this. But I did have an idea that I thought was a really good idea that I was excited about, and I really wanted to get back into science. And so despite these sort of doubts, I applied anyway. And this is one of the nice things I think about this scheme, is that in the first instance, they ask you for your CV and one A4 page of who you are, what you're going to do, and where you're going to do it. And that's really great because it means that you don't necessarily spend hours and hours and weeks, particularly for me when I was at home with my son trying to write this at the same time, applying for something only then to have someone come and say, oh, actually, it's not quite what we're looking for. So because of this 6th stage, you have this quite straightforward application, and then the Wellcome in the Royal Society will say, well, actually, we liked your one page and we liked your CV, and now you can submit a full application. And when you get to the full application, I'm afraid it is about 50 pages. But by the time you've PDF'd it up and everything, and all of the different boxes, it's quite long. But your actual science bit, it's only about 8 pages. So it's manageable. And for me, actually, the most challenging bit wasn't writing the science, because I had a really good idea of what I wanted to do and the background to it. And you get quite used to writing about science. For me, what I should say, and what I would say to anyone applying, the tricky bit is actually those bits around the edge, and in particular the budget, because I had never had to make a budget before, and I had never paid a lot of attention to what things cost, how much it costs your plasticware for a week in the lab, how much it costs to keep your mice or whatever. So it was pretty tricky for me to come up with those numbers. And also in terms of your budget, whatever university you're hoping to hold your Sir Henry Dale Fellowship at will treat it like a grant application, and therefore there's quite a lot of internal review process with the university finance, which again, if you've not written a grant application before, which I hadn't, it's a bit of a revelation, and you definitely do have to make time for that and not kind of, the day before the deadline, pass it to university finance. I should also say, with respect to my full application, that because I was at home with my baby when I wrote the application, I didn't have any preliminary data in my application at all, and that didn't act as a barrier to me ultimately getting a fellowship. So I think it's important for people to know that if you've got a good idea, there are ways around this idea that people have, that you always have to have a lot of data to show that your idea is a good idea. So I wrote this full application, and kind of it went into the Royal Society and the Wellcome for a little while. And at some point they sent me an email and said, oh, we like your full application, would you now like to come to interview? And I can't now remember how much notice I had of that. It felt like a really long time between being invited to interview and interview, but I think it was only 2 weeks, in fact, wasn't it? So it felt like a really long time between being invited to interview and going to interview, but actually it's only about 2 weeks. And in this time, people will say, you should really, really do a practice interview, and I do recommend that because it does help you iron out anything stupid you might accidentally say in front of the panel. And I know some people do loads and loads of practice interviews. I managed to arrange one with UCL because that's where I was hoping to go. And for me, that one interview was enough. I think you can probably over-practice it, over-prepare it. So when you get to the actual interview, I did mine in the Royal Society in a great big room with luminaries on the walls, kind of looking down. And there are took me 3 months to arrange to move. So I think I probably, from first thinking about it to actually being at UCL, not in the lab because I had to buy the stuff to make the lab, was a year.
Yes, I would say that a year is, I wouldn't plan on anything less than a year, actually, if you're thinking about it all in.
And I think one of the keys, as Vicky mentioned, is also not underestimating how long it takes to do the sort of admin side of things and get the application through the university steps to sign it off. Furthermore, you really, really must build in time to get people to read your application for you before you submit. And it is no good sending someone like Fiona an application saying the deadline for the Wellcome Trust and Royal Society is tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Can you have a look at this now?
I can't agree more. One thing I found in sponsoring people for Henry Dale Fellowships is they will often be outside of the UK, and it's quite difficult working on a grant application purely by using track changes on a document going backwards and forwards. And the value of sitting down with somebody and saying, just explain in simple terms that I can understand what it is you want to do. Because I think productive, ambitious postdocs are very close to their data. They assume that everybody has a total expert knowledge on everything they've done, and it's about stepping back and trying to frame what you want to do in a different way. It's a big transition from being a postdoc, very busy doing your papers, to saying, well, what do I want to do for the next 5 years?
Yeah, I sort of, to expand, I think, on what you're saying about stepping back from your research, whenever I write something, I have it pass something that I call the mum test. And some of those people out there, maybe your mums are top research scientists, but my mum sells books about rabbits to children's bookshops. And I find actually that if I can't explain it to my mum, then I'm not thinking about it clearly enough, perhaps myself. You have to be able to explain what you're doing to someone who's interested, but who doesn't necessarily know what a T-cell is.
I agree. Right, on that note, Sophie.
Yeah, we've got quite a lot coming in now, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. How big is the impact of the supporting senior researchers on the acceptance rate? It's a tricky one.
So your question is how, well, I think we'd interpret that as does the track record of the sponsor matter?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Candy, perhaps?
It's very important that you're in the right environment for your research, but the applicant is the candidate themselves. It's the candidate themselves who come in for interview, and therefore we will only fund those candidates who meet the standard. Therefore, we have turned down people who have had very, very important sponsors because they themselves were not up to the standard, and we have funded people whose sponsors who were less famous. So it's the candidate that matters. However, if you're not in the right place for your research for whatever reason, then that might be an issue.
Yeah, I'd sort of agree with that, and saying from being involved in reviewing fellowship applications, if you look at the applicant and the sponsor and you can't really understand why they would want to be there, it's an alarm bell, really. You want to see that it's going to, because after all it needs to be a fertile environment for you to grow as an independent scientist.
Okay, there's quite a lot of questions around success rates for the scheme overall, but there's one here that captures what I think people might be getting at, which is, does Wellcome Trust support all candidates who have been judged to be suitable, or is there an upper limit in terms of the number of people to be awarded?
That's a good question, which I'll pass over to Candy again.
The Royal Society, so the Wellcome Trust is we're in a very fortunate position. We're a very rich foundation, as most people will know. However, there is, of course, a finite limit, and we're not planning on spending all our endowment over the next 5 or 10 years. So there is an upper limit, of course, but to reassure applicants that when we go into a funding committee, an interview committee, we are prepared to fund everyone who makes the standard in that round. Now, in practice, of course, rarely are 100% of people interviewed funded, but should we come to a situation where we have an exceptional round, we will do our utmost to find the money to fund everyone. So there isn't a quota at the upper limit, but of course it is competitive.
Okay. There's a question about, well, it exactly says, what about partial support? Fellowships are usually for a 4-year period. Are there any options for shorter term fellowships, for example, 2 years?
No.
Sorry. It's hard to imagine why you would want 2 years' money when you could get 4.
Yeah.
5.
So it's 5 years.
Okay. Another quite short one, I think, from Johan. If an application is not shortlisted, can you reapply?
On a case-by-case basis, we'll give you feedback. Everyone who applies with the full applications gets the referee's responses. And again, you should contact us. We'll discuss next steps. And if there's a good, there's a good chance of you being successful second time around, then we'll let you in.
Okay. I'd sort of add on to that by saying that obviously when your fellowship is turned down, it's very disappointing. And the inclination is to read the referee's reports and say, oh, it's unfair, they said that. But actually when you have calmed down, when you phone the Wellcome Trust or visit them, you can get a very good insight into overall strengths and weaknesses. It's not really like answering the referee's reports on a paper at all. So Alexander, you wanted to say something?
So further to that, I was going to add that either the expert review group or the interview panel do have the authority to invite you to resubmit an application. And if you are ever asked to resubmit an application, then I'll advise that you speak to staff at the Wellcome Trust to help you, to guide you through how you can improve your application for the next round and the steps that you need to go through.
And if I could, I think I'm right in saying that if you do resubmit, the original application and the referee's reports are available to the expert review group, which doesn't mean that you have to, you're not being asked to respond to those comments, but it can be very helpful if the panel see how an application has matured over the course of 6 months or so.
Okay, and then there's a couple of questions along the theme of which institution. So it's nicely summed up by George, who says, can you stay at the same institution as where you're doing your postdoc? And then another participant is asking, well, do you get penalised if you don't move?
That's a very good question. Candy, you've got the wisdom.
So We ask everyone to explain why they've chosen to propose to do their research in a particular institute. And that goes for people who are moving and for people who are staying. So it is indeed possible to justify staying in the same institute, and we do fund many people who've been in the same institute for a considerable period of time. Furthermore, it's possible to be funded if you're proposing to move as well, and it's also possible for not to be funded if you're proposing to move. The whole point is we're looking for you to be in the best environment for your research and for your career. And I think the key issue around mobility is if people are worried that you're not going to be viewed as independent by your peers in your field if you stay where you've been for a considerable period of time, then that is something you are going to have to address in your application.
Yep. I think sort of linked to that, but it's actually in the context of having your fellowship. Is it possible to spend a period abroad during the first year during fellowship tenure? That's from Giuseppe.
It is possible, but it needs to be justified by the science you're proposing to do.
Could I perhaps interject and ask Vicky about how you chose your sponsor? You explained that you were at Imperial.
Yes.
Had you already thought about moving to UCL?
No. So actually, the way I ended up at UCL was because when I was applying for lots and lots and lots of things, one of the things I applied for was a thing that was run by UCL, which was a 2-year sort of small starter fellowship. And I applied for that. And I didn't actually get it because they thought that my project wasn't ambitious enough. But having written it up, the person who sponsored me, who's not now my sponsor actually, said, well, you know, you've thought of these ideas and you've written 2 pages for UCL, so why don't you write a page for the Wellcome, basically, in the Royal Society? And she said to me, though, your sponsor, though, shouldn't be me. It should actually be the head of department, because when your sponsor is the head of department, you are very much seen as a PI, someone starting your own lab. If your sponsor, this was the advice I was given, is someone sort of lower down than the head of department, then you're still kind of like a nodule of their lab, albeit that you're supposed to be more independent. So I chose just the head of department at UCL in the department I would work in, which is immunology, because that was the way that I could most easily be most independent. And I think I'm right in saying that the point of these fellowships is to make early career researchers independent, and so independence is something that everyone should really be aiming for.
Yeah, so if I could maybe amplify on that, I was talking to a young researcher at Cold Spring Harbor a couple of days ago who is in the US and would like to come back to Britain and would like to be sponsored for a Henry Dale Fellowship, but it's by no means trivial to find somebody who is willing to make the commitment to sponsor you. So it seems cruel in a way that you're struggling to find someone who will let you apply for an application, but that is the case, and you certainly have to plan the finding a sponsor well in advance, I would say. I think it's a very bad idea to assume you can just rock up and get the sponsor that you wanted without putting in any effort. Candy, do you want to?
No, it does come up at interviews sometimes in relation to what is the sponsoring hosting organisation providing you with if we fund you, and that may be staff. You know, will you have access to a PhD student? Will you have your own space? Sometimes we ask for a contribution to equipment, especially if the bill is hefty. So it is a significant commitment from a sponsor, and you should expect that as well, because you're looking for people who will support you throughout this critical point in your research career.
But I think also you need having this discussion to actually quite a lot get into the nitty-gritty, you know, where would my bench be? How big is it?
Yes.
Is there enough space for my centrifuge? And other things, like I've slightly, it's my own fault, but certain items of equipment that to me are so very basic that I thought, every department has one of these and it's just free to use. It turns out my department doesn't have, which has made some problems for me, all my own fault, because I didn't sit down with my sponsor and say, I am going to need a real-time PCR machine. You have got one of those, right?
Yes, good point. Sophie, any next questions?
A couple of more linking into your conversation about practicality, but are split appointments possible across two departments within a university or even between two universities where your research straddles multiple fields?
Our minds are open.
In practice, yes, we're very flexible, but technically we only need and only want a single sponsor, because there is clearly the more, well, in some ways, much more important support for your research, your career, but actually practically all they're doing is administering your grant, ensuring you get paid, ensuring your staff get paid, and that sort of thing, and that you have space and facilities. So I think in that instance you'd have a single sponsor, but you'd need supporting letters from the other institution to show that they were supportive of you and providing the same sort of resources. But I think the money would probably go to a single institution.
Yeah.
There's sort of a set of questions that are around researchers who are coming from other destinations, so foreign postdocs, as they've labelled themselves, who have decided that they want to work in the UK. I mean, do we have examples of success in this sort of category?
Well, I could perhaps answer. I'll give part of the answer there. Not only are there very good examples of postdocs, non-EU postdocs based abroad getting fellowships, but in a couple of situations I know there have been horrendous visa problems just for the candidate to be able to come to the Wellcome Trust for an interview, because 2 weeks' notice is not enough for a visa. And in at least one case, which I know which was successful, the Wellcome Trust agreed, because the situation was clearly so difficult, that the interview would be by Skype, and I think that's it's really fantastic. So,
all the fellows we currently fund on Sir Henry Dale fellowships can be seen on the Wellcome Trust and I think the Royal Society website, and so you can see who's out there, and it doesn't take a lot to actually follow up on some of their personal career histories, but yes, many of them are international researchers who've come to the UK for the first time as a Sir Henry Dale Fellow.
Can I add also that I think with international applicants who don't fulfill the normal eligibility criteria, the Wellcome Trust will consider your application on a case-by-case basis. If you are an exceptional individual, they will consider bending the rules for you so you can submit an application.
Yes, the other thing to point out as well is in relation to visas, and that if successful recipients of the Henry Dale fellowships actually get a fast track through the Royal Society's approval process as well. So we're very, very keen to attract great to the UK.
Sophie's just looking at her screen, but I wanted to ask Vicky a question because I know she's been asked, and the question is, what should I wear to the interview?
So I actually anticipated this question because I've been, I'm going to start by saying a lot of people who've been invited to an interview or who are preparing a PET fellowship will ask other people who they know are fellows, who they found on the website because all of our mugshots are there. They'll just send an email and say, hi, I don't know you, but you're a Sir Henry Dale fellow, and can you help me? And I'm very happy to help those people, and I sent 4 such emails to Sir Henry Dale fellows before I did my interview, and 2 of them got back to me. So I think it is worth asking people for this kind of advice. But when people ask me this kind of thing, the thing I'm most commonly asked is, what did you wear to your interview? What should I wear to my interview? And I was really, really strongly advised that I must wear a suit because it's just much more professional. And kind of I'd hung it up and everything, but at the last minute I thought, I can't do this. I won't be able to wave my arms. I won't feel comfortable. I'll sweat. And so I came to my interview wearing my best jumper, and this is my current best jumper, so for anyone who can see it at home, and a pair of real trousers, not jeans, and a pair of real shoes, not trainers. But that was the level of smartness I went at, because that was my level of comfort, and no prejudice was held against me for not wearing a suit. And I'm sure that plenty of your applicants probably took the same view as me and didn't come in wearing a suit.
And that includes the men as well.
Decisions aren't based on your apparel.
Sophie, do we have any more
We've
questions?
got quite a specific question. At the interview stage, how much of the decision will be based on the presence or absence of new supporting data? That's from Patrick.
All right.
We're not looking for new, just as Vicky said, in terms of preliminary data can help, and especially if you're exploring something that's very unusual or a bit controversial, either technically or because there are others in the field who might disagree. It's always nice to hear if things have been updated, but not all candidates are in the position to go into the lab and do more research, and Vicky's an example of that. So it's not required. A sort of sideways answer to that, though, is again around interview etiquette, really. Turning up at interview with a great wad of preliminary data that you want and expect people to read during the interview is actually not worth doing, because they need to hear from you real time about what you want to do and why you want to do it and how you're going to approach it. They're not going to have the opportunity to sit and review pages and pages. But you can mention new findings, and so that, you know, please don't feel inhibited about doing it. And of course, the one time that new data is absolutely critical is that if there was a particular issue that everyone was worried about, and if you can satisfy that concern straight off at interview, then that would be great.
At the interview, you have the opportunity to give a 5-minute presentation, and that's your opportunity to provide the panel any updates that you've made in the intervening period between submitting your application and the interview. So you should make the most of that opportunity during the course of the interview.
So it's a 5-minute presentation. Is there a limit on the number of slides?
Yes, it's 2 slides.
2 slides. So 2 slides in 5 minutes, and you should not put all your preliminary data or your paper that's in press on those 2 slides, I would say. And just to stay with that, so it starts with the 2 slides PowerPoint presentation. 5 minutes is very strictly adhered to. And then the length of the interview itself, how long is that?
40 minutes.
It didn't seem that long. Flew by.
Okay, we've got another one from Sophia who's asking about parental leave during the fellowship.
Once the fellowship is awarded?
Yes, I'm assuming so.
So the Royal Society and Wellcome Trust will provide support for parental leave for whatever the period taken, and furthermore we will extend the period of the grant at the end, not only for the fellow but also for the people employed on that grant over the period of parental leave. So that means that should Vicky decide to have another... anyway, you can... it means you're not in a position... It means you're not in a position of coming back from parental leave to an empty lab because everyone else's contracts have expired before your own.
And you're provided with a maternity supplement, if I'm not mistaken,
yeah,
to cover the cost.
Yeah, we'll also obviously support paternity leave as well.
Well done, you've just answered one of the questions that just came in. What about paternity leave, please?
I very carefully said parental leave. Thank you.
And sick leave is included also?
Yes.
Okay, now we've run through all the different types of leave. There's quite a few questions around what happens if you fail at the full application stage, and how much feedback, how long you need to leave before you can resubmit, and what feedback is provided, and any advice actually. There are a number of questions on that thing.
As I think we mentioned earlier, that you will see the referees' reports, you will get feedback from the expert review group, you can come to the trust offices and get further feedback then. How long you need to wait, or even if we are encouraged, we may not encourage you to reapply if the concerns identified by the referees are such that we don't think it's possible for you to address them. How long before you can come back? Well, it depends what the issue was. If there was a very specific concern that needed a very specific experiment, for example, to address it, then clearly you wouldn't be wise coming back before you've done that. So I'm afraid the answer to that is it depends.
Yeah. There's a question here about whether we take into account patents rather than papers. Can you make a comment on that?
I'm nodding.
Yes, exactly, yes. And then this one's quite nice because it gives this webinar a surgery feel. What's the most common mistake people make in their application?
Well, Candy's thinking, I would recommend looking at the Wellcome Trust website, which has a very helpful link you can click on, which is how to kill my application.
Yeah, I think quite often, especially with early career researchers, the phrase "there's 50 years of work here rather than just 5" is probably the most common issue. And second to that is assuming that everyone will know what you're talking about. And it goes to what Fiona said about being right on top of it.
Yeah.
And therefore not thinking, and again Vicky, not thinking clearly enough about the case for doing what you want to do. And so the temptation is just to put everything down and hope or expect the reader to be able to navigate their way through your complicated logic that might well be very, very clear to you, but actually does need to be spelled out more clearly.
Yes, I can't agree more. I sometimes think there is a particular problem with researchers who are postdocs in the US, because there is a tendency for big American labs to force or encourage their postdocs to ghostwrite their own NIH grant applications. And the level of detail in an NIH grant, even though they've recently been simplified a bit, is much more than in a Wellcome, Sir Henry Dale application. Mm-hmm. And it's all very well ghostwriting grants for your boss who has a huge lab, but that's very different to saying, here I am, I've left my boss behind. Yes. What realistically can I do? And who will believe me that I can do this?
And I think with all of these committees, they don't want to fund a piece of research that, should the candidate try and do it, will actually end up killing their career rather than
yes.
supporting it. They want to fund a piece of research that will be the platform for you to go on and be successful in the long term. Not something that may be very novel, may be very exciting, but actually is simply not going to be able to be pulled off by a single person with one RA.
Yeah.
So I actually have this is strange protocol. I have a question for Candy, even though I'm on the panel. So when you were talking about, making it so that it's accessible and it can be explained, I was saying how you've got these 20 people in front of you, only maybe 2 of whom are really part of your field. To what extent do those 18 people who maybe are sitting there not saying anything, when it comes to the discussion, to what extent does maybe someone who's outside of your field saying, actually, I understood what she was saying,
yes,
and I think it's a good idea. Does that matter?
It's a committee. It is a committee decision. They all vote. They all make the decision. They're influenced by the leads, of course, and they're bound to be influenced by the interview. But the other reason why they're selected by the Royal Society and Wellcome Trust to sit on the committee is their breadth of expertise. And even though perhaps they're not an immunologist, they may use very similar technologies in their own field. And so, in looking around the room, you may not know the names of all the people, but there are themes and similarities in broad areas of research that they will pick up on.
So when you're at your interview, basically, it is worth your while trying to be inclusive of the whole panel, because it's not just those 2 people that are interviewing you that will make the decision.
But equally, you don't have to dumb it down. You shouldn't.
Well, they're all very clever people, I'm sure.
Yeah, you need to be able to
But I would say, as a bit of interview technique, that you can find out who the members of the panel are, and it's a very good idea to have a look at what their area of expertise is, because you may find out that there's somebody who actually has a tangential interest to what you're doing, and I think it helps you get mentally in the zone if you can at least have some idea of the expertise of everyone on the panel.
And they do, when you're invited to interview, I think I'm right in saying that you do send a list of who's going to be on the panel, and then it's just a sort of PubMedding / Googling job.
Not everyone may be there in the end, though, and there may be other people brought in. So,
but I just think even so, it helps you prepare mentally for that experience of going into a room full of scientists, which can be very daunting. Sophie,
there's another one. Could the panel say something about the chances for success of a proposal based on the development of a new method or technology as opposed to a pure hypothesis-driven application?
Most of the applications are pure hypothesis-driven applications. However, we do fund technology development. The number of proposals we get is small. But actually, if it's important enough and you're good enough, we'll fund it.
I think that's about it, really, unless the people out there type very quickly. Patrick says thanks to the answer to that question, just FYI.
So just as we wrap up, I just want to ask the panel if there are any points that we've failed to bring out and that you would like, sort of parting words of wisdom or encouragement.
I think my advice is to seek advice. I was very pleased that Vicky said we're nice. We try to be nice, even though inevitably we don't fund everyone who does contact us. It can do no harm contacting us. We're more than happy to give you advice, answer any of your questions to the best of our ability, and you should not feel inhibited by contacting us. It is far better to contact us, the funders, to get real information rather than listen to gossip in coffee rooms.
Yes.
I would say that timing is important. Think about the best time to apply for a fellowship when you're considering your career stage. Give yourself enough time to submit a strong application, as Candy said, to seek the relevant advice, and make sure that you have the right people on board to help you, to develop your ideas, to submit that strong application. And have a plan B. Don't put all your eggs into one basket. Look at the options that are available that are out there, because there are other funders who provide similar levels of support. So bear that in mind when you're preparing your application.
Now, I would say I was impressed that Vicky only had one mock interview, because I spend a lot of time at King's doing mock interviews at all levels, and often the first mock interview is spent saying, these slides are really bad. We've got to take them apart, try again. I think you can have too many mock interviews, but you have to get the slides right and then the questions. And it can be a really good bonding experience with your future institution, because if senior people are happy to take time out and give you advice, both on the written part and on preparing for the interview, you feel when you've been successful that it's not just you that's succeeded, but you sort of feel that the whole team behind you has succeeded, and that's a really great way to get started.
No, so I mean, actually coming back to Fiona there, I would just like to say I probably would have had more mock interviews if I could have done, but it was a question for me of arranging childcare. Some people, for example, will be coming from abroad and will maybe have one day in their host institution before they go and do the real thing, and I wouldn't want those people to feel that because there are some people out there who are doing 5 mock interviews,
5 is too many,
that they're at a disadvantage, because I think that, you know, if you really make the most of your mock interview, you should definitely have one, but if you make the most of it, I think that you can do as well as someone who has loads and loads. For my sort of parting shot, I guess I would say that, you know, I so nearly didn't apply. I so nearly was put off by things that I had heard, most of which turned out, I think, not to be true. So find out the facts, and if you have an idea that you're really excited about, then even if you think that you haven't got enough experience, write your page and just see what the funders have to say about it.
That's good. Any last questions online?
No, I think that's it. Just a lot of thank yous.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone. I think we have a thank you slide. Oh, yes. Yes, and that's it. So thanks to everybody for taking part, and email us if you have ideas for other webinars that eLife could host for